totally connect to one another. They don't totally relate. It's not really a series. It's just different things I've had in my head that I thought we needed to talk about at different times. And next week will probably be that same kind of thing. And again, it doesn't all relate. It's just stuff I've been thinking about. One thing I've noticed, and it came from just overhearing that somebody was telling, one Christian was telling another Christian a joke. And the nature of the joke was that it was really hot in this city where all the bad people were, and Vegas or San Francisco or something. I kind of came in late, and that they better get used to that heat was the nature of the joke, because it's going to be a lot hotter for too long. And it wasn't like a hilarious joke. It was just a little thing preachers might tell one another. But the whole thing kind of rubbed me wrong, because we can be judgmental of people sometimes as Christians and dismiss them and just assume that they're not clean enough to come in here and hang out with all of us good folk. And I hate all that. I just think when you lose sight of the fact that Jesus has saved us by grace, that no matter how good we are, the distance between you and whoever the worst person is much smaller than the distance between you and Jesus. And it's just very easy for us to lose sight of that. And especially, and the joke I think was about people who make different sexual decisions or choices and that are kind of out of the norm. And that was part of the whole deal. And I overheard it, and it wasn't like it was something that everybody was gathering for, but I overheard it, and it just kind of ticked at me and picked at me and bothered me. And there's no place really. When you think about all the different things that the church says, hey, Christians should do this and Christians should not do that. When you think about the places where we disagree with the world, there's probably no place that we disagree with the world more than on sexual decisions, sexuality, and sexual identity, and choices people make there. It just seems like on a lot of things, traditionally, historically, the Bible has taken kind of a dim view of drunkenness, right? You shouldn't be drunk. And the world disagrees with some of our take on that for sure, but there's still laws about not driving drunk. There's still laws about public intoxication. They still won't serve liquor to somebody underage. I mean, even though the world disagrees with some of our take on it, in the big parts of it, we mostly agree. When you talk about as a Christian, you should be generous. The world appreciates generosity, even if it's not always generous. The world appreciates kindness, even if it's not always kindness. But when you talk about sex or sexuality or sexual identity or anything with sexual stuff, it just seems like the chasm between what the church has historically taught and what the world believes is just miles and miles and miles wide. And there's just nothing that connects us anymore. And so it becomes a really easy place for Christians to be judgmental of people outside the church, but it also becomes a very easy place for people outside the church to assume they have nothing at all in common with the Christians, and makes them want to. It puts fences up between us and God. So I wanted to talk about all that for a second, if I can, and I won't be able to get all of it done today. And it's possible that what I talk about today will actually lead to a different conversation with somebody, and that's awesome if it does. But I'm convinced that more people struggle in these areas than we like to pretend. And even though we all try to give a clean and holy picture of ourselves when we're here especially, I think more people struggle with this than we like to pretend. So I just wanted to kind of go briefly over what the Bible speaks about on this thing, and what has historically kind of been the church's position on sexual issues, and then talk about how we can take that information and share it with the world around us, what makes sense about that. Paul, writing to the Corinthians, this is in 1 Corinthians 6, says, I've got the right to do anything. And it's in quotes. So he's quoting something that they were saying. He's taking something that they were saying, and he's kind of parroting it back to them. Like, you guys say this, but then, okay, so you guys say, I've got the right to do anything, but, he says, not everything's beneficial. So you've got the right to do whatever you want, but not everything's going to take you where you want to go. And we've talked about that in other contexts. You've got the right, when you turn your car on, to turn the steering wheel whichever direction you want. You don't have to follow the road. You can turn it, press the gas as hard or as soft as you want. Go wherever you want. But there's only, some of those choices are going to take you down a painful path, right? And that's not being judgmental. That's just how the world works. And that's what Paul's saying here. You've got the right to do anything, sure, but not everything's going to take you where you want to go. And then he leads from that into this conversation about sexual immorality. He says you got to flee from it. He says, flee from sexual immorality. The word for immorality there, sexual immorality, is the Greek word porneia, which in our day makes you think of pornography, and it certainly would include pornography. But it's anything that takes you out of one man, one woman committed forever. And I'm going to talk about this again at the end of the sermon, but the traditional Christian teaching is that you should not be 100% intimate with someone who has not become 100% committed to you. And that shouldn't be controversial. It shouldn't be. That shouldn't be like wild and crazy teaching. That should be something that we all, my daughter, when she was at IU, she took a psychology class, and in the psychology class, they talked about people who live together have a harder time holding that together for a lifetime than people who are married. And IU's not a Bible college. I mean, it's that's not a Christian statistic. That's just truth. It's just truth. Unless you're 100% committed, you don't want to be 100% intimate with anybody. That's always been the Bible position. And so Paul says you want to flee from anything that's taking you the other direction. And flee means you go as hard as you can the other way. You don't hang out. Now, if Mount Pleasant, just us, the people in this room, decided we're going to obey that, anything that takes us down the wrong path, it would change the shows you watch on TV. It might change the books you read or the music that you listen to. It would change some of the friends that you want to hang out with. If we made a decision that we're not going to be near any of that at all, it would affect us. It would, because our culture, I mean, they use sex to sell everything. Everything. And so if you tried to run away from all that and flee from any possible thing that would corrupt, you would find it very hard. But that's what Paul's advice is. And his reason for that, he says, because all other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. And I want to focus really on just the first part of that second sentence. All other sins. Paul says this sin is different than any other sin. I heard a sermon by Andy Stanley not too long ago when he pounded away at this idea, and I thought it was compelling. This sin, more than any other, makes you a liar. You may have a friend who will talk to you about anything, but they won't talk about this. They won't. They'll keep this quiet if it's anything embarrassing or that they think might bring guilt or shame. You might have somebody who you're a close friend with who will open up quite a bit about the stuff they used to do. Yeah, when I was a kid, I used to get drunk all the time. Or yeah, when I was younger, I was stupid, I was violent, or I was mean. Or yeah, when I was younger, I went and made some bad choices. But on this particular thing, people get real closed-mouthed. We don't want to share this. It makes people lie. One of my close friends, when got married pretty quickly after high school and to a great guy, and it seemed like it was a great marriage, but almost immediately he started cheating on her. Almost immediately started having other girlfriends. And at first, she didn't believe it. And then when she finally did believe it, she tried to forgive him. And they went to counseling and tried to work through it. And there's just more and more stuff kept coming out. And it came out that in the middle of all this, that he had, as a child, been sexually abused. And they had gotten married, and she had no idea that this had happened to him. He never told her. Which is crazy in a way. You would think if I'd ever trust anybody with this information, it would be my husband or my wife. But it wouldn't come out, and it didn't come out right away in the counseling either. It took a long time for that to finally come out, and then they thought that was part of what was making it hard for him to build a long relationship because of all this stuff that had happened years and years and years and years and years ago. It's not like any other sin. It's not like any other sin. Somebody can steal your lunch money in elementary school and you'll forget right about that. Somebody can call you a bad name and that might hurt for a while, but it won't change your whole life. But sexual sins aren't like any other sins. They just have much longer consequences. They get their hooks into you much deeper. And it's much harder to escape. I mean, certainly an unwanted pregnancy, you can't ever escape that. Or if you commit yourself to someone sexually and it becomes this longer relationship, some relationships you can't ever totally get away from them once you get deep into it. Some people are able to watch things and it doesn't really affect them very long. Some people find that watching one thing leads to watching two others, and before you know it, they've invested 3 or 4 hours in just downloading all sorts of evil information in their head that affects every other relationship they have, and it's just not like any other sin. It's just not like any other sin. It has a way of punishing you much harder than anybody else. And I know this sounds kind of judgmental, and I guess at some level it is a little bit judgmental. I mean, you could say the same thing the Corinthians said to Paul all the time. Well, I got the right to do anything. But I'm going to tell you just like Paul did. Well, you've got the right to, but not everything is going to take you where you want to go. And so for me, I have to put up some fences so I don't go too far down that road. I don't let myself watch just everything on television. And I don't just let myself surf and watch. I make sure my wife has all my passwords to everything. I know that may seem crazy and childish to some people, but I don't want there to be any chance that she could say I was doing something I shouldn't be doing. I want her to be able to check up on me if she wants to. I hope she's not doing it all the time. That would be a sign of something else, I guess. But she can, if she wanted to. When the stuff we do here at the office, I don't counsel somebody where it's just me and them alone in a back room where nobody knows what's going on. I try very hard to be as open and honest about that as I can, because it's not like any other sin. It's not like any other sin. Any other sin, you can say you're sorry and maybe make a few amends and it goes right away. But this particular thing, it just has a way of putting hooks in. And the weird part about the judgmental thing is if you're married, you sure hope your husband or wife flees from sexual immorality. If you're married, you hope that they say amen to all this stuff. If you've got a child and you love that child, you hope that they're listening to this. A child who has a parent, you're hoping mom and dad don't struggle in this area, right? If it's somebody that you love, man, you hope that they're rock solid on this area because you know the damage that it can do. And yet, sometimes if I tell somebody, well, yeah, because that you also shouldn't just watch whatever you want or listen to whatever you want or go wherever you want or talk to whoever you want. You also should put up some protection to make sure you don't do something foolish. Well, are you being judgmental? Well, I guess, a little bit. It's only because this is not like any other sin. More than any other sin, people will come and talk about choices they made in this area years ago. And they'll say things like, my life would have been completely different if only I had not done that. This one makes you a liar more. This one bends relationships more. Paul says, do you not know? Now earlier, the last verse I did, he talks about the consequences. Well, now here he's talking about your identity. He says, don't you know that your bodies are like temples of the Holy Spirit who's in you, whom you've received from God, and you're not your own. He says your bodies are like temples. We don't think about temples in Christian thinking very much, but you can imagine, maybe as a tourist going to a temple, and it's really huge columns, and it's all stately, and there's gold and statues, and it's all precious, and you're not allowed to get to certain places unless you're a true believer in whatever it is, and don't take pictures in here. This is a holy place. And Paul says, that's you. You're a temple. And you're a temple because of what God has done. And it goes to your identity, what kind of person you are. Now, just for conversation's sake, what do I mean by identity? You're precious because of God's Spirit inside of you. So you don't need anybody else to validate you. You don't need to sell yourself out to anyone else because you're already validated. And you're precious because of what God is and because He's in you. That's what he's saying. A couple of years ago, it's been almost 20 years ago now, Julia and I got robbed in Texas, and we lost my billfold and her purse while we were in Texas. Somebody broke into our hotel room. And I wasn't upset about losing the billfold. I was upset about what was in the billfold, right? I was upset about the money and the cards and my driver's license and all other stuff. I was upset about all those things, and they were hard to replace, all those things. It took weeks and weeks and weeks of canceling this thing and arranging this thing and getting this other thing done, and it was such a pain. In fact, had I been on the road and the thief had come and said, give me your billfold, and I said, well, can I empty it? Sure. I'd have given it right to him. I wouldn't have cared. Yeah, here, take a billfold. Enjoy. Oh, There's probably a Velcro billfold back then anyway. Sure, go ahead, take it. I don't care. I don't worry about it. It's only valuable because of what's in it, right? And you're valuable because of what's in you. It's not because it's because God is invested in you, because God is part of what you're doing, and you don't give your another way of looking at it. This guitar in 2014 sold for $45,000. You can buy that guitar, I mean that very same brand and model, at Melody Music in Bloomington for like $1,800, but it sold for $45,000 in 2014 because it belonged to this man. It was his guitar. It was Eric Clapton's guitar. And if you want Eric Clapton's guitar, it's going to cost you $45,000. It was in an auction. It's only valuable because he played it. It's not valuable because of the guitar. I can buy a guitar just like it online for less than $2,000. But if I want to buy a guitar that he's played, if I want to play a guitar that he's played in concert, that is something that's valuable to him, well, it becomes valuable because of who owned it. And you're valuable because God owns you. You were bought at a price. You're not your own. God treasures you more than anything. And you're valuable because he paid everything for you. God looked at you and said, I would rather die than lose you. I'd rather have nails put into my hands and feet than to go without you. I'd rather lose everything than to lose you. And so you become valuable not because of who you are, but because of who God is and what he's done and how he owns you. And I know on all this stuff, like I said, it can sound judgmental, but the reason why it's so important that you stay straight on this area of sexuality is because of who owns you, because of whose you are, because of how valuable you are in him, and because all other sins, there's just no other sin that wounds and hurts and causes lasting damage like this one does. You should be more careful about this sin than any other sin. Now, a couple different times in the course of being a minister, I've had to go talk to somebody about choices that they were making in this area that it seemed like did not align with the things that I've just been talking about. And the things I've been talking about, any church teaches that. It's not just Christian church, Baptist church, Episcopalian, Presbyterian. We all pretty much teach the same thing. That's traditionally been the thing. And I'll go talk to somebody. Seems like you're kind of out of line with what traditionally has been told. And often, when I have that conversation, they'll bring this verse up. Matthew chapter 7, don't judge. Don't judge. And this verse is supposed to shut you right up because if I judge at all, then I'm going to be judged. And just so we're clear, I think what this verse means is if I hold a high standard with you, then I should expect God to hold a high standard with me. So I should be very careful when I get judgmental, because if I'm going to take a position to say, okay, we've got to live to a little higher standard, I'm putting myself in the spotlight here too. If I make this declaration that, hey, maybe you could improve your marriage a little bit, the very first thing you're going to do is take a look at my marriage. The very first thing you're going to do is, well, what about you? I bet you're not perfect either. And so because of that, sometimes it's kind of scary to get into this at all. And every time I've ever had to get into it with anybody, it's painful, and it's awkward, and it's difficult, and most people do the things they do because they think those are the right things to do. They don't do them. They don't intentionally think they're wrong. They think it's the best they can do with what they're at. And so when you tell somebody, hey, I think maybe you should make some changes here, they're not going to appreciate it. And so I want to think about this for a second. When should I be quiet, and when should I say something? When is it just being judgmental, and when is it helping people? Well, part of it starts right there, my motive, right? Why am I doing it? If I'm trying to make declarations about who gets into heaven and who doesn't get into heaven, that's not my place. I don't think I could ever look at anybody and say, a sinner like that never gets in. When I was, I don't remember, really young in ministry, there was a serial killer who made national news, Jeffrey Dahmer, and he was eating people. I mean, it was just really gross, awful, terrible story. And he was found quickly guilty of all this awful stuff, and they threw him in prison for the rest of his life. And in prison, the other prisoners killed him. In prison, the other prisoners killed him. They said, we can't tolerate a guy wicked as this in our prison, which just tells you something. The other prisoners couldn't even put up with it. But before he died, in the week or two before he died, he said to everyone that he had become a Christian. He said he had converted to Christianity in prison, that he believed that Jesus could forgive his sins, that he was giving his life to Jesus, and then a few weeks later was killed by the other prisoners. And if he's telling the truth, that he really gave his heart to Christ, then I fully expect to see him in heaven, even after all the awful things he did. You're not saved by your own goodness. And if I ever tell somebody else, you better straighten up or you're not getting into heaven, I think I've went too far. I don't think that's my job to tell people whether or not they're getting in because of the bad things they do. Because no one's getting in if it's just because of the things we do, right? I think you went too far. I think you went too far whenever you start barking at people to act like Christians if they're not Christians. If a person's not a Christian and you're telling them, you better straighten up, why should they straighten up? I don't think that's part of what they're called to do at all. But if it's a Christian, right? If it's somebody who believes the same things that you believe, and we're all trying to get to heaven, and we're all trying to follow God, and we're all trying to do the best we can for Jesus, well, that's a different animal, isn't it? I mean, you're supposed to say something. You're supposed to stick your neck out there a little bit. That's not being judgmental. It's trying to help. I mean, I have a heart for you. I want you to come to be in a better place. I mean, sin, it's bad to be bad. It's going to hurt you. And sin is like a cancer, and it's a poison. And this particular sin, it's not like any other sin. I mean, if it really gets its hooks in you, you may never come out. And it'd be cruel for me not to say something. One of our kids, when they were little, we couldn't get them. We went to the pool. They would jump right in. No floaties, didn't matter. As soon as they saw the water, they jumped right in. They couldn't swim. So they'd jump in, and you'd have to jump in after them. I hope you had your clothes ready to go because you had to go right in after them. So we wouldn't even let her get close to the water. I mean, we would hold her hand real hard the whole time, and she's straining at us, trying to get close to the water, and you're holding her back like a little Tasmanian devil as she's spinning, trying to get close to the water. Well, I mean, it wouldn't be right to say, okay, I'll let you figure it out. It's too big a thing for them to figure out. So I can see something here, and I'm just trying to help out. And it didn't make me her most popular person sometimes, but I just know what's best here. And I just want to, my whole motive is I want you to have the best kind of life. And if that's your motive, and you're not making any big declarations about heaven or hell, you're just trying to help, I just think we have to say something. I think, on the other hand, when we take the attitude that certain people are so bad, and they're so messed up, and they're so screwed up that it wouldn't even do any good to talk to them. Just let them do what they're going to do, and one day they're going to burn, and that'll be fine. I mean, I just don't think as Christians we can ever take that attitude. I have a Jeep, and I've had it for a really long time, and one of the hard parts about Jeeping in this part of the country is that if you really get after it, it takes about 6 hours after you're done to get your Jeep back in shape. It's just muddy all over, and it just takes forever to get it straightened up. And once, after doing that, I went to a car wash to try to clean up, and they wouldn't let me pull in. When I pulled up to the car wash, a guy walked out, you're not bringing that in here. I said, well, yeah, it's dirty, I want to clean up. Oh, no, you're too dirty to come in here. It was really disappointing. But when we tell people they're too dirty to come in here, we've crossed a line. We've crossed a line. Jesus is the hope. And as I'm talking about this thing, it's possible that one of you, or maybe more than one of you, several of you are thinking about areas where maybe you don't have this particular area 100% straightened up. And it's not polite to admit that in a mixed crowd like this, and I understand that, but you know, and God knows, and there's maybe some things that happened a long time ago that you would give anything if you could go back and change that, but you can't go back. Or maybe some things going on right now that are taking you down kind of a bad road. I want you to know that you can't get too dirty for Christ to clean you up. And he can do it. And if you get close to Jesus, he'll start pointing out ways that we can make some adjustments. And he'll do a much better job of pointing that out than I will. And the deeper you get with Christ and the more you invest yourself in Christ, he'll show you what you need to do. And don't be afraid of those things, because the things he's showing you to do is helping you become the person you were always supposed to be. And it won't be painful. Not ultimately, anyway. It's what you were meant for. So that's my sermon, but I wanted to recap just a couple of it. There's a couple things I want to hit on just again, real fast, just five things, real fast. It won't take very long, but just to make sure that we're communicating clearly. The first thing is I want you to know that, again, for any decisions you make about sexual stuff, that 100% intimacy, when you're giving yourself 100% away, that should be reserved for somebody who has made a 100% commitment to you. If I could speak to younger people, I know that the rules have changed even since my generation about how far you can let yourself go in this thing and not be considered a bad person. No one's going to shame you if you jump pretty deep into this thing at school. And so it's not about shame, and it's not about guilt, though I promise those things eventually come into the equation. But it's not about that primarily. It's about understanding that you're too valuable to give yourself 100% away to someone who's not willing to make a 100% commitment to you. And if I could get that message real deep into people's heads, I would save you so much pain. You can't even imagine. And I know it's going to be a hard thing to hold true to, but it would not be hard for me, if I can talk to some people who are younger making that decision, it would not be hard for me to produce 50 or 60 people who would tell you the same thing. Take it from me, they would say, in my life, I did not make that decision. I would give anything to go back and redo that. Because it's not like any other sin. It's just not like any other sin. So I would advise you that. I would advise you to, even if you've not got somebody who's committing to you 100%, no matter how old you are. Sometimes a person who's been divorced or been married before, they think the rules are different for them on this area, because they've already crossed that line. It's not like any other sin. And if someone's not willing to make 100% commitment to you, you should reserve yourself a little bit from them. 100% intimacy is for 100% commitment. I said that earlier, and I wanted to kind of rehash on that. And the Bible, again, we're talking about sexual immorality. It's anything besides one man, one woman for the rest of your life. God, in the Garden of Eden, takes Adam, tears him in half, and when they come together, they're one flesh. The man and the woman come together, and they begin to be like each other, and they begin to learn from each other and grow into each other, and it's beautiful when it works. And it's painful like really nothing else is when it's not working. And that's the dream. And that dream is worth pursuing, and that dream is worth selling yourself out for. So I covered that earlier, and I wanted to mention it again. I also covered earlier, you need to be careful to set up some boundaries around yourself in this area, maybe unlike other areas. In this area, unlike other things, I would encourage you to avoid intimate meetings with anybody who might be a problem person for you. If it's somebody for whom you might be tempted, just keep some separation there as much as you can. Now, I know sometimes in work, you have to travel with people you don't get to choose, or you have to have a dinner meeting maybe with somebody that you don't get to choose, and sometimes you can't control it. Even here at the church, we have a policy that we won't do counseling, me and just one other person of the opposite gender. We won't do it as much as we can avoid it. But occasionally, in weird moments, you're stuck in a situation where you just can't get away from that. And in those situations, I'll call Julia. Hey, I got to go to a meeting. It's going to be just me and this person. It'll be this long, and then I'll come home, and I'll call you when we're done. And it might seem childish to put all those different rules up around you, but this is not like a sin like other sins. It's just not. Traveling with someone, eating out with someone, the social media stuff can be like crack for people who are struggling in this area. Keeping secrets with just one certain person that you won't tell your spouse, or that we have this special thing that we do and nobody else does. Again, there is such a thing as innocent flirting. That's not what I'm talking about. There is such a thing as just bantering and stuff like that. I'm not talking about that either. That's also cool. It's the problem person. And so on the judgmental thing here, someone might say, well, it sounds like you're being judgmental. Who is a problem person? Well, you know who they are. You know who they are. It's the person who, when you come into the office, you always go left because they're over on the left and not the right. When you come into the office, it's the first person you talk to. It's the person whom you have like this thing, and you're kind of uncomfortable telling your husband or wife about them and all the little secrets you have at work. It's the person who you notice them when they come in, or maybe that has made you feel special because they notice you unlike other people. You know who they are. And I'm not going to talk to you like your children. And I used to, when I was in youth ministry, I would tell the kids, I'll help you with this, but don't pretend I'm an idiot. Same thing. You know who the problem people are. It's not a mystery. So avoid getting too close there. And be open about it when you're struggling. Have at least one or two people. Your spouse ought to be one of those people, but if they're not, have one or two people you can talk to and just say, hey, I've got a problem here with this area. Sexual sin really thrives when it's kept secret. If no one knows but you, really, really, really has power. So I think you need to have at least one or two people you can be open and tell. And if something's going on that makes you uncomfortable with yourself and where you want to be and who you want to be, and you feel like it's not quite right, ask someone. Say the words out loud. Talk about it. I know sometimes that's painful. I know sometimes that's difficult. And like I said, this sin makes you a liar more than any other. But if it's something that you're struggling with, man, there's so much power in just getting one other person to know. I don't know why that affects, because it's not like any other sin. It's not. I'll tell you stupid things that I struggle with about a bunch of stuff, but on this particular area, it gets really easy for me to clam up and not want to share. And that's how everybody is. So find one person or two that you can be open with and talk to them about it. If the statistics are right, there are people in this room who struggle mightily with this issue, and not just one or two. If the statistics are right, this is an issue that has its hooks in a lot of people in here. And maybe it's different. Maybe we're just more pure than everybody else, but I have a feeling that's not how that works. If it is a brother or sister, that's my last thing. If it's a brother or sister in Christ, you've got to be willing to talk to them if you see them going down a bad path. James says, remember this, if you turn a sinner from the error of their ways, you're going to save them from death and cover a multitude of sins. And if it's a Christian, if it's somebody that you know they believe and they care about the same things you believe in, and they're going down a bad path, you just have to say something. Now, I will say, for whatever this is worth, because of what I do for a living, I think I probably do more of those kind of conversations than most of you do. I hear about more situations probably than a lot of people do. I think as a Christian, I have an obligation to say something. But as a minister, maybe I hear about things more than most. And I can tell you that from experience, from painful experience, that these conversations almost always go poorly. I don't want to lie about that. They almost always go poorly. When you start trying to have this conversation with somebody who's already taken several steps down the wrong path, they're going to tell you to mind your own business. They're going to tell you they don't want your judgment. They're going to tell you that you just don't understand their situation, and if you did, you'd have more mercy and sympathy and grace. And I will tell you, you want to be as merciful and graceful as you can be in this thing. You don't want to take a superior attitude. You don't want to assume, well, I would never do what you're doing, because you don't know what you'd do if the right situation. You don't. And most of us are plenty stupid enough if you give us enough rope to do stupid things. And it will go poorly, but you have to say something. You just have to. Now, if it's not a Christian brother or sister, if it's not somebody who believes the same things you do, then no, I don't think you have to bark at them. In fact, I don't think it's helpful. I think you want to introduce them to Jesus and let Jesus work on their heart. That's not your job. If it's somebody who doesn't believe any of the things you believe, no, I wouldn't. If you're the office argumentative person who's always bringing up why everybody else is a mess, but you've got it all together, you need to repent of that. I don't think it's your job. If you're the Christian at the office and you're the only one who doesn't go to the bar after Friday, then you don't need barking at them. If they don't believe the same things you do, then what do you care? And honestly, it's almost arrogant for you to assume that you could convert them before Jesus did anyway. So your agenda there is just to introduce them to Jesus. And don't get into the specifics. But again, if it's a brother or a sister, if it's somebody who cares about this, man, you just have to say something. And even though it often goes poorly, I have found that sometimes people leave that meeting and they think about what you said and they come around. And again, every time you do that, every time you help somebody escape what is a sin like no other, you saved them from death. You've covered a multitude of sins. I remember one fellow that I was talking to, it's a long time ago in Tennessee, and he unloaded the whole deal. You know, we were talking, and he started sharing all this stuff, and he kept saying, I know this is probably going to shock you, and none of it shocked me, because we all struggle with the same stupid stuff. It's just, some guys walk a little further than others, but it's all the same stupid stuff. And he said, it's going to shock you, and he kept telling me all this stuff, and at the end of all of it, he said, I guess you think I'm a mess now. And I said, I thought you was a mess before. I always thought you was a mess. This didn't make me think that. And that's where we're at, right? And again, some people, like I said, walk down the road further than maybe you have or will or could, but it's all the same stuff. And we need one another. So my encouragement would be that don't be scared to stick your nose into it, especially if it's someone who you love and they love you and they love Jesus and you've got that common thread. Don't do it from a position of superiority. You don't have it all figured out. We're all a mess. We're just trying to do the best we can. All right, I'm going to have the band come back up. After the service, I know it might be hard to want to come up and pray about this. So I want to caution the people in the crowd first. If you see somebody come and pray, they may not be struggling with any of this. They may have been telling their husband or wife, you know, we got to pray about this house we're buying or something. And now I've preached on this. Now they're scared to come forward because they're afraid somebody's going to think, wonder what's going on with the Joneses. And it may not be that at all. So my caution to you is don't do that to people because it's cruel and it's mean. And my caution to you is if you need prayer about anything, man, take advantage of this time because it's precious and tomorrow's not guaranteed. And if you need prayer about anything, man, come get prayer. But certainly, if you need prayer about this issue, can I encourage you before you leave today, find someone to pray with. Whether you come forward at the end of the service, you still can find all these people afterward. You find me afterward. Somebody grabbed me after first service. We talked about something that wasn't really totally related to this, but it opened up some thoughts they wanted to talk about, and we talked about it. And man, that's powerful, and that's what we're here for. And if God is speaking to your heart and really putting pressure on you, man, you need to straighten some of this up. Then straighten it up. Go pray with somebody. After the service, there's guys in the back who will take you to our prayer room, and they'll pray with you back there. Don't let head go to pillow tonight before you start making steps to address this thing, because I don't know that God will needle you like that forever. I think these times when he needles you are precious, and you need to respond to those when he does. So if that's happening to you, just want to encourage you. Pray about anything. Feel free to come and pray about anything, but especially on this big stuff. Man, take advantage of today and really guard your heart. Let me pray for you first. Dear Lord God,